Dr. Joanna McMillan is an accredited practicing dietitian, PhD qualified nutrition scientist, fellow of the Australasian Society of Lifestyle Medicine, and graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors. Jo is a regular on television across all channels and has presented nutrition segments on Nine Network's Today Show for more than 16 years. Dr. McMillan is the author of 8 published books and 4 audio books, covering a range of topics, including gut, brain, and heart health. Jo's an experienced speaker and MC with over 1 million views on her 2017 TEDx talk. Along with a career spanning 3 decades, Jo has the credentials and the experience to earn her place as one of Australia's most sought after and trusted health and wellbeing experts. And we're thrilled to welcome you today, Joanna.
It's my pleasure to join you.
It's lovely to finally meet you. Now, there's so much to learn in this space, but we've got keto, paleo, low carb, high fat, DASH, Atkins, Lumen. I don't even know what Lumen is. What and how we eat now and in the future has never been more important in terms of its impact on our physical and mental health, and not to mention the health of our planet. Yet it's more confusing than ever for us to know the best choices to make when so much conflicting information abounds. We're constantly evolving and learning when it comes to our holistic health, and diet is a huge part of that. Now, there are 4 nutritional pillars to our holistic health that I want to talk to you about today. Now, I understand these 4 pillars are part of your sort of narrative around holistic health and in your keynote media presentations. Could you tell us a little bit about these 4 pillars and how they collectively and collaboratively improve our overall well-being?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, really what I've talked about over the last few years, and actually these things all link together. So I always talk about the center of your health really starts in the center of your body, which is your gut. So gut health is something that is if you don't have good gut health, it's very hard to function from day to day. Anyone who's ever struggled with their gut health knows this, how debilitating it can be to your energy levels, to, your gut is where is your facilitator of getting your nutrients out of food. So it's not hard to imagine that if you don't have good gut health, A, that might lead to discomfort and feeling bad, but B, it means you're not getting the nutrition the rest of your body needs. And then we've got this whole evolving space of the gut microbiome that we can touch on a little bit. And that's how gut health links to everything else. And that led me on to sort of really understanding more about, when I first studied as a dietitian, gosh, almost 3 decades ago now, that makes me feel very old. When I first studied,
you look fabulous, so it's working.
Thank you. We really didn't talk much about nutrition for the brain. The brain was kind of this elusive, organ that just makes us who we are, and we really didn't talk much about how nutrition might impact it. But we did understand that eating in certain ways did reduce, risks of depression, and we did understand that there were some nutritional links there, but we didn't really understand why. And actually, the gut health space has helped us to understand what those links are. And now fast forward to today, and I've written a whole Audible book on what to eat for a better brain, because we've got great research now on what you can do, not just to improve your long-term brain health in terms of reducing your risk of dementia and other things that can happen to us later in life, especially for us women, but also for improving our brain function from day to day. So, I do a lot of talking to corporates about how do I make my brain work? How do I avoid the 3 p.m. energy slump? How do I be more creative at work and so on? So that's the gut and the brain. And then we've got, of course, heart health, which might sound a bit old hat, and everyone's a bit, oh God, we've all talked about heart health and heard about eating for a healthy heart. But actually, even that advice has evolved and changed as scientific evidence has moved forward, and in particular, the nutritional links. So I think there's still a lot of confusion in that space. So again, I've literally just got an Audible book about to come out in that space to really give the updated information about how we can eat for a healthier heart. So that's the heart space. And now you've made me forget what my 4th pillar was.
Well, we've got immunity
immune health. Thank you. Immune health.
Rich food. Yeah, because I want you to break this down for us in a minute.
Yeah, so we've got the gut, the heart, the brain, and then we've got an immune health links again into that, especially into that gut health space. And the last one you threw at me there was about plant. I think it's worthwhile us talking about this, because this sort of plant-based is a term that's being thrown around a lot, and I think it's being misused. It's being used as a bit of a health halo, and I think it can be very misleading for a lot of people in terms of what is the absolute best way for them to eat. So I think we should spend some time sort of really unpacking that and understanding what is the way to move forward.
Yeah, well, and that's exactly it. That's what I'm to do, because these things, obviously, the gut, the immunity, the brain, and then how plant-rich food, not necessarily plant-based, constantly, how that impacts. So let's start then with gut health. We hear a lot about it now, which is great, and we're starting to understand, because I think we forget that some of those foods that we, might have a Coca-Cola, a soft drink, and some of these foods that are really not good for your gut. We think that having them occasionally is okay, and it probably is. I think the gut is strong if it's strong. But can you explain a little bit more and how in isolation your gut health can impact your overall health, both from negatively and positively?
Yeah, so if you think about it, first of all, from what the gut's function is. So the gut's function starts at your mouth and it ends at your bum. And everything that happens in between, it's essentially a big long tube with various pockets of things along the way, and different areas of your gut have different sorts of functions. So your mouth starts the process, and digestion even starts in the mouth. We have enzymes in saliva that start to break down some of the carbohydrates that are in our food. But the mouth's job is also to masticate and start, breaking down our food, because food has to be, by the time it leaves the stomach, it's got to be in a liquid form for our enzymes to be able to get in there and be able to start breaking things down. So the stomach is really a bit of a holding pattern, but the stomach's job is also to keep churning food. More carbohydrate digestion actually stops in the stomach, but other digestion can start there. And then it's sort of made into a liquid that then goes into the small intestine, whose job is essentially to get the nutrients out. So our digestive enzymes get involved here, and it all moves through the vast length of the small intestine for us to get our nutrition. And then what's left enters the colon, and that's where the gut microbiome really comes into play, because its job is to help us with that digestive process by helping to break down especially some of the plant compounds that are there. So we're talking here really about some of the little short chain carbohydrates and fibers that are present in plant foods that we can't break down. And actually the bacteria and the other microbes that are present help to break these things down and actually produce other beneficial compounds for us. They play a very important role. And essentially, we have to make sure that there's enough content there to reach the colon, to feed them, because they play a really key role in our health, but also to keep enough content there to keep moving so that we don't end up being constipated, and we can get rid of, because that sludge that's left at the end is what carries out some of the toxins and other bits and bobs that we don't want hanging around in the colon, which is the area of the gut most susceptible to cancer starting. So we want things to be shifted out of there relatively quickly. So that's kind of a really bird's eye view of what's going on in the whole gut.
Well, fascinating, really, because I just don't think we give it the credit, right? Now, it's interesting that you say we should keep some sort of content there, as long as it's constantly moving, because you don't want things to be sitting there, right, for too long. So eating is a really important part, obviously a balanced, because I think I need to eat more frequently, but less now, and that keeps it moving. Is that a good way to eat, do you think? Like, we talk about how we should eat, 3 straight meals, 6
well,
little
do you know what? There is no hard and fast rule about how often you need to eat, and it is different for every single person, and a number of different factors impact that. I am not a fan of there was some talk of, 1 meal a day, and there are people who follow this 1 meal a day kind of idea. And there's a few problems with that. One is 1 meal a day. How on earth do you get all of your nutrients into 1 meal? When you think about the amount of food we really need to give us the nutrition we need, that would be extremely difficult. And if you were trying to get that all into 1 meal, it's an enormous meal. And I don't think for anyone it's really generally a good idea to overload the body with such a big meal at one time. And we've also got some evidence from science showing that in fact, fasting for that long and only eating 1 meal a day can have detrimental effects. You can start breaking down muscle, for example. You're overloading the body. You actually decrease your insulin sensitivity, so you're not as good at responding to the carbohydrates that come in from your food. So there's a whole lot of different reasons. And I think especially for women, And I've got this is me not with my science hat on, but with my hypothetical, me trying to analyze and look at us through evolution. My theory is that for women, we were the gatherers if we go back to hunter-gatherer time. So women are much more likely to have been grazers throughout the day and to be eating more often throughout the day. And if you eat more plant food, you actually need to eat more food. Because plant food in general, there are always some exceptions, but in general are much less energy dense. So you think about a cow who's only eating grass. A cow has to eat all day long to get the nutrients they need. And
Like a cow.
gorilla or sort of cousins have to eat all day long to be able to get the nutrients that they need. Whereas the men were more the hunters, who would go out and they would go for long periods of time without food and then eat much more energy dense of the animal foods that they caught. So I don't know, I've kind of got this little bit of a theory. It's not really backed up by science showing women do any worse on fasting, but certainly my impression talking to women is that often we find it harder to go for long periods of time without food. So I would encourage most women to kind of listen to your body and get more back in touch with your hunger cues. I think you're right that for some people, eating regularly but in small amounts, I think the 3 meals a day with 1 or 2 snacks, if you're really hungry between meals, is not a bad way to eat. I mean, there's a reason. I mean, apart from our sort of standard workday, there is a reason why that has become a sort of regular routine. When you look around the world in different cultures, it very is often that same 3 meals a day. Of course, there are exceptions. But I don't think that that's a bad way to eat, but it doesn't mean it's the only way to eat. What I will say is that it is important that we give the gut a break. So there's a sweep that happens when you get, and it means at least a 12-hour, I would suggest, fast overnight. Because when you give your gut a break, and your gut is never completely empty unless you fasted for a very long time, but by giving a break as to what's going in the tube at this end in your mouth, you actually encourage your body to do what it does is this muscular sweep throughout the whole gut that sort of moves everything along and kind of does this bit of a clean out. And if you don't allow that to happen, actually that can lead to constipation. So it's kind of constant eating can kind of end up with, the tube gets a bit blocked, and no wonder. So having a bit of a break, I think, is a good idea. And then it's up to you to work out, how active are you through the day? What's your job? I don't want people thinking about food all day long and having to think about, every 2 hours I've got to have something to eat. Not at all. Often if you just eat less, but you focus on those 3 meals, you end up with 3 very balanced meals. Whereas people who snack and graze all the time are often snacking and grazing on the wrong stuff.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, isn't it? It's also not getting to the point where you're starving and then eating whatever you want. Yeah, so it really is, again, about listening to your body, which I fear that many of us, particularly as we're raising kids and running businesses and, all these things and trying to be a good mother, sister, aunt, friend, we're not listening to our bodies. So what you're saying is there is no hard and fast rule. It is listen to your body, but ensure that there's only the quality food around, fruits, nuts.
Exactly. I encourage all women to try to build, I think the saddest thing we've done in the last 50 or so years is to really make women see food as the enemy and see food as a stress. It's another thing to be stressed about in our lives. I hear from women who are just so stressed about trying to eat healthily that it becomes just another thing to worry about. Or who are so worried about what they should be eating that they can't enjoy going to someone's house for dinner because they're worried about what they're going to be served, or being able to go out for a meal and just really enjoy a meal out. So I think it's so important that we build our relationship with food and we recognize that food should be a pleasurable, wonderful part of our lives, not something to be scared of, and we've done ourselves a disservice by calorie counting and being fearful of carbs or fat or gluten or sugar or whatever the latest thing is. And actually, we just need to get back to our roots of going, we're nurturers naturally as women. We're generally carers, and actually getting back to having a good relationship with food where we want to eat well. We want to feed our families well, for those of us when we're cooking for other people, because the food tastes good and because it's really good quality, lovely food. Not because it adheres to whatever the latest dietary trend tells me I ought to be doing.
Exactly. Too much of one thing it can't be a good thing, right? Like, so if the paleo way or whatever, there's meat, but I don't know. It's tricky. But I guess the point with the gut health is making sure that we're thinking about what we're putting in there each time that we.
For sure. So in saying that, I don't mean to say it's not important and you should just eat whatever you want. Actually, there's many, the really key point when people ask me, okay, how do you say in a nutshell, Joe, what's your elevator pitch for how to eat a healthy diet? I said, you know what, it comes down to there are many ways to eat healthily, provided you do one thing, and that is eat whole foods and cut out the ultra processed foods.
Yeah.
Or at least strictly limit ultra processed foods. That's it. That's the
and it's easy, right? I mean, it is easy. I mean, you do, again, when you're busy, you can tend to reach out for those ultra processed things, but actually they make you feel pretty terrible. Yeah. All right. So then the gut health sort of leans into then also your immunity, right? So how can we achieve strong immunity when we talk about immune health?
So this is where it comes down to, well, your immune health, your immune system to work really well needs certain nutrients, okay? So vitamin D, for example, I'm doing a lot of talking about vitamin D at the moment as we move out, which seems weird talking about we're moving into winter when we're still on 30-degree days in Sydney. I'm sure you are up there in Queensland. But, in the winter, we see more than 1 in 3 Australians are deficient in vitamin D in winter months. So I've been talking a lot about this at the moment because I work with Australian eggs, and eggs are one of our best foods for vitamin D. So if you have an egg a day, that's enough. That's what the recent research has shown to prevent that drop in vitamin D over the winter months. And even, I know if lots of your listeners are up there in Queensland and you think, oh, we've got plenty of sunshine up here. Think about how often we cover up and we wear long sleeves and we put our hat on because we don't want aging on the face, and we don't.
I'm on vitamin D supplements because I'm really low in vitamin D, and I'm outside all the time, and eat very well.
So it's really easy to happen. So vitamin D is absolutely crucial for your immune system. So is vitamin C. So are some of the minerals like iron and zinc. So there's a whole bunch of different nutrients. As with any system in the body, nutrients are necessary. So we've got those nutrients there. But then this is where things get interesting, because the gut microbiome is intimately involved with our immune function, because the gut is essentially, although we think of it as being inside our body, really the inside of your gut is still the outside world. So the gut and the skin are your interface with the outside world. So about more than 70% of the immune system is centered in the gut, because its job is to make sure the right stuff gets into the body and the wrong stuff doesn't. So the gut microbiome communicates with the immune cells in various different ways. So if you've got a strong, healthy, diverse gut microbiome, which is what we want, that actually leads to a stronger immune system. So we've got fascinating research that's come out over the last decade or so, showing that if you've got a strong, healthy gut microbiome, you're better able to fight off coughs and colds and flu and even COVID-19. You're able to have wound healing better. All sorts of aspects of your immune system work better. So that comes back very nicely to the way that we're eating to feed not just us, but to feed the gut microbiome. And that's why things like fiber is important. We can talk about polyphenols or biophenols. These are this sort of hot research topic in nutrition, because we know they're really good for brain health, but it's the gut microbiome that changes lots of these compounds found in plant foods into very beneficial compounds that have anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effects within the body. So the gut microbiome, again, is this sort of key pin lynch between our health, and it shows us that they're really important. So one of the things I've been really worried about through the pandemic is that we've taken a backward step in terms of our germophobia. Before the pandemic, we were sort of getting there and teaching people that, not all germs are harmful. Actually, microbes are all around us, and 90% or so of them are not just not harmful to us, they're actually beneficial. We need them on our skin. We want them in our homes and on our surfaces. We don't want everything to be sterile. Yes, if you go into the operating theatre, you want that to be sterile. But in our normal life, we want these healthy bugs around us. And I fear that during the pandemic, we've kind of taken that step backwards to now disinfecting our hands and disinfecting everything and wanting everything to be sterile, because we're so fearful, because our understanding is, oh, well, there's this virus that might cause us harm. So we've got to understand that within our gut, those microbes are generally, particularly if you eat the right diet and encourage the growth of the right microbes, they're our friends. They're essential to our health. You know, we would be in very poor health if you put mice in the laboratory and you raise them in a sterile environment so they don't develop a microbiome. They can't live a normal life. And they have all sorts of autoimmune problems and all sorts of other health issues, including mental health issues as a result. So that kind of really teaches us that microbes are our friends for the most part. It's only a small minority that can cause us harm.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we have become super paranoid, and not only that, it's taken a backward step for our health. It's taken a backward step for the environment's health because we're now gloves and masks and all that sort of stuff. But you're right, we need to reintroduce these, you know, I guess these little germs that we're trying to stay away from. But it's tricky. It's hard to know when to do that, and hard, you know. Is there any I guess anything you could offer in terms of how to feel comfortable around the world now that we're kind of in this post-pandemic world?
Yeah, well, I think within our own homes, it's a matter of being clean, yes. You know, I'm a bit of a neat freak. I like everything to be really nice. So we can be clean without being sterile, okay? So you can wipe down a surface. You can use, you know, earth-friendly type cleaners in your home rather than using bleach. Now, you might want to put some bleach down your loo every now and again, or when the tiles are getting, you know, so I know that my cleaners talked me into, please allow me to use some bleach sometimes. So I've had to relent on certain things. But, you know, for the most part, you don't need to be sterilizing your kitchen bench. You can just clean it with a, you know, soap and water kind of cloth. Same thing with our hands. You know, you don't need to have antibacterial soap in your bathroom. You can just have regular soap and hot water and clean your hands that way. So yes, I think it's a good idea. We touch our face a lot, all of us. So it's a good idea to do the old hand washing. That's a great way for not passing on the wrong kinds of germs. But, you know, we don't need to be wiping down our children with antibacterial wipes just because they fell in the dirt. You know, we don't need to be antibacterial wiping everything just because we pat the dog. So it's just getting that level of the difference between clean and sterile. And then remember, your microbes are there in your gut anyway. Recognize where you've got good bugs. So things like live yogurts that have got bacteria in them, other fermented type foods, you know, perhaps considering taking a probiotic depending on what your particular health needs are. There is some good evidence behind particular probiotics for particular health outcomes. You know, drinking something like a kombucha that's got some live bacteria present, so a good kombucha might be a great idea. Kefir is a fantastic source of these good bacteria. So just recognizing that actually some good bacteria is a good idea. And then you want to feed them once they're there. So that's when it comes down to the prebiotics that are in food. So that's essentially eating a diverse range of different types of plant foods. So whole grains, legumes, fruits, vegetables, nuts and seeds. A range of those different foods will give you the fibers and the prebiotic fibers you need to encourage and feed those really good bacteria in your gut. That's the bottom line.
Great advice. Great advice. I think, you know, we get a little obsessive about things sometimes, and particularly, I guess, if you've had COVID, and I haven't, fortunately, but I think people who have are probably a little bit overzealous potentially. All right, then let's move on to brain food. Now, nutritionally, I think we've simply neglected our brains. Ironically, it just wasn't on the radar. So why do we need to eat well to improve our brain health? What is it, you know, and what do these inclusions look like in our diet?
Well, the first thing to recognize about the brain is it's another organ of the body. So it requires a fuel source. Every single cell in our body requires fuel to be able to work. And the main fuel source for the brain, its preferred fuel, is glucose. And that's a sugar. So when we see this whole sugar is toxic, we're confusing. To scientists, sugar is a number of different compounds, including the glucose that's running in your blood and feeding your brain. And about 25% of the glucose that's in your blood is going to feed your brain. And we can use upwards of 120 grams of glucose a day for your brain. So that's the first thing to recognize. So when we read these bad things about sugar, what we're really talking about is refined sugars that go into ultra processed foods. So, you know, I think we've become a little bit, you know, we're sort of pointing the finger of blame at sugar when actually the real problem is the ultra processed food. That's where you're getting all sorts of wrong stuff. And if you eat too much ultra processed food, we know it's not good for your brain. So, you know, it impacts mental health, but it impacts your brain performance for a whole bunch of different ways. So that's the first thing to recognize. So you need a good source. So making sure that you're eating in a way that helps to keep your blood sugars relatively steady. So of course that you tend to get a rise after meals, but we want this gentle rolling hill kind of effect with our blood glucose. We don't want big sharp spikes and then leading to big drops and troughs where our energy is likely to be low and the brain might be going low on its fuel. So keeping a nice even blood glucose is sort of the goal. And that's where whole grains and legumes and fruits come into play as our main sources of carbohydrate, because they tend to be lower glycemic index. That means they're less likely to cause those big spikes in blood glucose. So that's fuel. But then these cells also need nutrients. And, you know, when I was doing the research for my Audible book, Mindful, What to Eat for a Better Brain, I was actually, even when I pulled together all the research, sort of had this, you know, moment of a light bulb moment where I went, you know what, many of the nutrients our brain needs are actually found in animal foods. And they're either only found in animal foods, so things like vitamin B12, or they're best found in animal foods and they're not so well absorbed and utilized from plant foods. So things like choline that we'll get from eggs, it's in the egg yolk. And, you know, iron that we don't absorb well from plant foods, sorry, we absorb much better from animal foods. So we've got all of these nutrients that the brain needs to work really, really well. And that's why, if you know, in our introduction there, I was saying I'm worried about this sort of path we're going down with plant-based. That it's very difficult to get your long chain omega-3s, for example. They're concentrated in the brain, and you don't get them in plant foods. So the omega-3s that we get in plant foods are the shorter chain types. It's ALA is the parent one. And we have some capacity to elongate it and make these long chain omega-3s for the brain, but we have a very limited capacity to do it. And some people genetically are even worse than others. So we know, and I've tested my own genes, so I know that I'm not very good at making those long chain omega-3s. So for me, I can't help feeling following a vegan type diet would be a disaster for my long-term brain health. So I'm a firm believer in getting that balance between animal foods. And this is, by the way, putting all ethics aside. If ethically you tell me you don't want to eat animal foods, and we could talk about this as a whole other argument to have. I don't think we can have
We'll
food.
chat about that another day.
I know. Let's not go down that rabbit warren. But essentially, you know, if I've just got my nutrition science hat on, all I'll say is a balance of animal and so that's why I prefer the term a plant-rich diet that includes plenty of these plant foods, because they're also important for the brain. They do give lots of brain nutrients. The polyphenols I mentioned before, they're present in plant foods, and people with high polyphenol diets tend to have better brain health. So it's that balance. You know, I always wonder why we feel the need to go to the extremes and the ends of the spectrums. And I see these people, I read an article about Bear Grylls is promoting a carnivore diet now, and he used to be vegan. And I go, why didn't he just come to the middle and go, I'll eat a few animal foods?
I know.
It's crazy stuff. Just come in the middle, and generally that's where you find your balance and what's best for us.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I have to say, I think, you know, too much of anything is not a good thing, but a little bit of everything is a little, you know, of good, everything is good. And I was going to talk about the plant-rich food rather than, so, okay, then what type of non-plant-based, so meat, dairy, those things. And obviously eggs are a big deal in my life. And you were talking about blood sugars before. And of course, I was diagnosed as type 2 as one of the conditions 2 years ago. So that's, it's been in the family. I was obviously mistreating myself significantly and stress and pain and all these things, as well as a carb heavy diet. So of course that smacked me in the mouth, but I'd been tested for 20 years and nobody came, all said, no, you're all right. And then of course it just hit me. So I think, the balancing those blood sugars is really something that is so important, and particularly obviously as we get older, this is also, you can potentially sort of fall into that, into this category of type 2. So it's important to think about the blood sugars. And when you were talking about the brain food and the refined sugars, that's just the point, right? It's the refined sugars that we need to ditch, not sugar,
Exactly.
fruit and all these other things. And jelly beans sort of became a little bit a part of my life, which is sugar, but it's a glucose. But refined sugar really is the one that's the devil when we talk about sugar, right?
It is, and there is a difference though there with, I'll pull you up in the jelly beans. Jelly beans are great for people with diabetes and injecting insulin when they get a hypo and you really need to get sugar in quickly. That's where the sort of medical jelly beans are useful to,
just sometimes
are sold for people with diabetes. But I will urge caution that, in your normal life, you should be able to control your blood glucose. And actually for people living with diabetes, I don't mean to scare you with it, but it is absolutely imperative that you get on the top of it and manage it really well, because if you've got type 2 diabetes, it raises your risk of pretty much every other chronic disease, including dementia. So you've got to manage it really well. But the good news is that it's easier to do than it has been in the past. You can, I don't know if you've got one, a continuous glucose monitor.
No, but I think I'm going to get one, yeah.
Yeah. And even for people without diabetes, I mean, I did it. I did a show for ABC's Catalyst on diabetes. And so as part of doing the show, I experimented with using a continuous glucose monitor myself, and I don't have diabetes. But just out of interest to see, okay, and we did all these little experiments that we filmed where, I would eat a meal that was rich in carbohydrates, a healthy meal that was brown rice with veggie stir fry kind of thing, and then show the difference between eating that meal and then sitting on the couch, or eating that meal and then taking my dog for a walk. And the difference that happens in your blood glucose response is extraordinary. And then I would show the difference between having, white bread with Vegemite on toast, and compared that to having a really nice whole grain sourdough with the Vegemite, and looked at with some avocado and looked at the difference. So I try to illustrate that even for those of us who are not struggling to conduct, we don't have anything wrong with our regulation of insulin and glucose. Even for us, our food choices and our exercise choices all make a difference to the way that your blood glucose levels are responding. So I think it's not a bad exercise for anyone to do, just out of interest to see. Yeah. And also we all respond differently. I mean, that's, I think, one of the most fascinating things that's come out of research. My own PhD was in the area of glycemic index, but more recently we now see research come out of Israel in particular, showing that we all respond very differently. And again, this is coming back to the gut microbiome. Your gut microbiome influences your liver's release of glucose into your blood. So it's intimately involved again with your blood glucose responses. So I might eat a certain food and I don't really respond much in terms of my blood glucose, but you eat it and you get a massive spike.
Yeah.
So that's where this can become interesting, to really look at your individual responses to food.
Well, interestingly, when we talk about the glucose monitors, when I first was diagnosed, I wanted to get one, and there was no way I could get one for love nor money because I was type 2. And now, fortunately, there are companies that are offering it, fortunately. But you're right, like I can have something, I got my numbers back to sort of 5 straight after I'd been straight after I'd been diagnosed, but it's been very difficult. It was great for ages, and then it's just kind of now starting to play up again. So I've got to sort of look at things, and which is why I'm going to get that. But my point about I want to bring up the blood glucose levels is because I've had friends and other women tell me that, they've been diagnosed as pre-diabetic, which I'd never heard of when I was diagnosed. Diagnosed as pre-diabetic, so they're on metformin, so they're quite happy. They've lost a little bit of weight and it's no big deal. And I'm really trying to impress upon women, it is a massive deal, and it's super important that you get that in check and get your diet back to where it needs to be so that you don't step over that.
Absolutely. I mean, the positive about being diagnosed with pre-diabetes is that you have the opportunity to reverse. To go,
I wish I was.
Back up, and you can prevent yourself from getting, or at the very least delay it progressing to type 2 diabetes. Absolutely, I will reiterate your alert.
Yeah, there's just a little blaseness about it. I'm like,
yeah, and it's not just diet. I would like to say that it's also exercise. Exercise plays an enormous role. So even if you don't, metformin's an amazing drug that can really help. But what the most important thing for you to do is to actually get moving. You need to exercise, because even if you don't lose weight, exercise makes you more insulin sensitive. It gets you better at pulling glucose up out of the blood. It gets you better at utilizing glucose in the muscles. It just makes your metabolism work better. So, rather than, I think a lot of women get despondent because it's so hard to lose weight. But even in the absence of weight, don't exercise because you think it's going to help you lose weight. Exercise makes you metabolically healthy.
It makes you metabolically healthy and brain healthy, because there's nothing else that, it's not negotiable really, at least moving for an hour each day or half an hour each day. Because really, for me, exercise has always been about trying to maintain good mental health. So it's an overall thing. The exercise is important, but like yesterday, I was under a general, I had a procedure, so I didn't do any exercise yesterday. Today, my bloods are up. Right. Yeah. So it's just, you can see all of that. So I really want to impress upon women who are pre-diabetic. Don't fall into a metformin love, because it's a hell of a drug too. It's supposed to be good, but it makes you very sick. So I always use an opportunity. So coming back then to plant-rich food, how much should we be consuming then? Like in the red meat, what are the best forms of non-plant-based sort of protein or omegas that we should be consuming?
Yeah, well, first of all, let's talk about the animal foods first that are in there. And, my tip is to go for quality. There's no doubt that we have an issue with feeding the world at the level of meat intake but here in Australia, so I'm going to be the defender of foods like beef and lamb for a second, because here in Australia, we have this big hoo-ha around eat grass-fed meat. In Australia, 90% plus of our cattle are on pasture. The only time they're not on pasture is when there's a drought and there's insufficient, or because they're deliberately being fattened up because the Japanese in particular want their Wagyu beef. There's been this trend towards sort of marbled fat meat. And that's a very sort of different thing. And that's for the flavors. And that's the sign of, and I recommend not buying those kinds of meats. Wild animals have very lean meat in general. And that's the sort of meat we ought to be eating. So if you're choosing really good quality meats, and lots of our farmland, it's not correct to talk about, well, if we planted all that farmland with crops, we could feed more of us. Because there's huge areas of Australia where we couldn't plant crops where the cattle are. They're useful to grassland. And even from a sustainability perspective, yes, cows are producing methane, but there's a natural biocycle of methane going into the air, but it's being pulled, the carbon is being pulled back down into the grassland and then being recycled through the cow. And cows are incredible animals. They turn a food that we can't eat, grass, that doesn't give us the nutrients that we need, into extremely valuable nutrient dense meat in terms of milk and the things we make from milk and meat. So, they're incredibly useful animals for human nutrition. The problem is our farming management. We've got to make sure we don't increase herds so much that the grassland is diminished. We've got to make sure that there's good management there. And this is where the whole regenerative farming and all of these new terms are coming into play to really help us with understanding farm management. So for women, I see particularly women who have high energy. So if you're still, sorry, not high energy, high iron needs, and that's the premenopausal women. I'm still premenopausal at the moment. We have enormous iron needs, and it's very hard to meet those from a plant-based diet.
Yeah.
So meat is generally very good for us. Where the problem comes in is a lot of the meat research has come out of the States, where they have highly intensive reared cattle in feedlots who don't see a blade of grass in their entire life. They're fed an unhealthy diet, the meat is much fattier, etc., etc. There's all sorts of reasons there. And the people who are eating too much meat are often men. They're eating huge quantities of meat and not eating enough plant food to balance it up. So there's a whole complicated picture there. I don't agree with this kind of blanket, meat's not good for you. It's about your totality of your diet.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Where the confusion lies, Joanna. We're all going, oh, 1 minute I'm going, I should be plant-based. Next minute I'm enjoying it, some
so I think it's about the balance on your plate. Instead of making the steak the hero on the plate, and if you're lucky, there's a side salad or there's a bowl of chips. That's where we go wrong. Make your meat go further. So think much more about a smaller quantity of really good quality meat. And have it, 3 times a week or so is really great for most women. But balance it up. Now, eggs are really good nutrition. We talked about the vitamin D, but there's also choline, there's folate, there's a whole bunch of different brain nutrients in the yolk of the egg. There's 13 different vitamins and minerals in eggs, plus the antioxidants that we need for eye health. These carotenoids called lutein and zeaxanthin. So as we get older, that's really important for your eye health. So eggs, again, are really good to include. Dairy foods often get a hammering from people, and
Yes.
dairy is one of the foods that women often say to me, oh, I've cut out dairy. And I say, why? You know, these are really good foods for calcium. We're very prone to osteoporosis as we get older, but we also need protein. And so remember that things like cheese and yogurt are fermented foods. So if you're buying good quality cheese, yogurt in particular is a really good quality food. These are ways to get protein into our day and get calcium into our day. And with the yogurts, it's also giving you those good probiotic bacteria. So, you know, having some dairy is generally a great idea. So the idea is that you choose these really good quality, and I haven't even mentioned fish. Fish, of course, should be in there.
I was going to ask you about fish.
Yeah.
Yes.
Omega-3s and even foods like oysters and mussels, and these are incredibly sustainable seafoods. You know, we want to make sure that we're getting enough seafood to give us the brain nutrients we need, but also to give us omega-3 fats are very anti-inflammatory throughout the body. So seafood's fantastic to include. And try to look beyond just Tassie farm salmon. You know, look for our wild caught fish that are sustainably produced and caught, that are giving us lots of different nutrients that you know are really beneficial to us. So, you know, I try to sort of get my seafood variety rather than always going for the same type. Yeah. Then when we turn to plant foods, yes, we want a broad range and a diverse range of different plant foods. So if I just think of, you know, your plate to any one meal, or, you know, your average kind of plate, especially at a main meal, maybe a quarter of the plate is from animal foods, but the other 3/4 is likely to be plant foods. So lots of veggies, get some fruit into your diet. They've got unique sort of fiber types and antioxidants present in them, and a great source of usually quite slow release kind of glucose. And make sure you're having a handful of nuts every day. That's so fantastic for your heart health. Use seeds in your salads or in your smoothies to give texture and to give, you know, vitamin E and other key nutrients. Use whole, don't be scared of carbs, just cut out the refined ones. Go for a lovely whole grain sourdough bread. Choose brown rice. Pasta, even white pasta actually has a low GI, but we just go wrong with the portion. Yeah. So use a smaller, I have to admit, I'm not a wild fan of whole grain pasta, but, you know, and I'm not
if you get away pasta.
But just watch your portion size and combine it with a big salad, and you know, make your bolognese go further by adding a can of beans and, you know, having a big salad with the meal. So it's about getting that balance. And, you know, legumes, you should be having it every other day. So it's getting that balance between quality animal foods and quality plant foods, but you know, a vast variety and a diversity of plant foods in your diet.
Yeah, you know, you do talk about the sourdough thing. It's true, and because I'm watching my bloods and also how I feel when I eat certain things, you know, I can get a beautiful, fresh, well-made sourdough, and it barely spikes me at all. And I can have a piece of wholemeal bread from, you know, the normal ones on the supermarket shelf, and it just sends me through the roof. So it is, you know, and equally with pasta. Clearly don't eat that very much anymore, but you know, if we're going to go out or something, I'll say, well, can we go out for lunch and have pasta, right? So that at least I've got time to process it and digest it and things. So
have a little walk in the afternoon.
Yeah, so that's an important part too. Is it timing of what we're, you know, when we're eating the sort of big meal? Does that make a difference? I know it does to me, but
for sure. Yeah, I think all too often I see women in particular, I think, who try to go, because we're watching our weight and watching what we eat, and we're busy in the day, it's easier to kind of to stay away from food. But I see women sort of trying not to eat in the day, but then they fall off the ledge at night when it's dinner, and they suddenly realize they're starving and need to get an enormous meal. And that's not a good idea. It is much better to spread your intake across the day, give your body a chance to digest and absorb and make use of those nutrients. So you've given yourself your nice overnight fast, you spread your nutrients, you're not eating any big meal any at once. And as for when, and there is research to show, if you eat a lot of your calories or your energy intake in the evening, particularly late in the evening, or if you're a night eater, because you're snacking in front of the TV, or you can't sleep, so you get up and you have a little snack, you know, that is very much linked to weight gain. So the best advice is to have your main meal by all means in the evening, because that's generally when we can sit down with our families or, you know, with friends or whatever, and relax and enjoy a meal. But make sure you've got at least 2 hours before you're going to bed. And make sure after that meal, kitchen's closed.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
often
that's
that,
the tricky part, right?
yeah, the nibbling into the evening is usually the wrong stuff, let's be honest.
Yeah,
It's the ice cream
completely.
or the chocolate or the
Completely.
whatever comes at the bickies that come out when you're watching TV at night. So try
Well,
and keep kitchen closed after dinner.
yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's the key, isn't it? I must admit we have started to eat at nana hours. But it works. It works. And I think the other thing I was watching, obviously, when I was doing some research on you, and you made a funny point about the fact that we won't eat the banana because it's carb heavy, but then we'll go and have a protein bar. And
Oh,
I laughed out loud when I heard you say that, and I thought, it's right. We somehow lost our way when it comes to being sometimes with common sense around our diet. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that example?
yeah, that was in my TEDx talk. I think I did that, and it always gets a laugh because people go, "Oh yeah, why are we doing that?" If you read the ingredients list on that highly, so these are examples. I mean, look, there's a place for a package for, I put some packaged bars that I buy and stick in my kids' lunch boxes and so on. But there's a place for some of these foods, but often they have what I call a health halo, and it says protein on the front, so you immediately assume, oh well, this has got to be good. When you read the ingredients list, you realize, oh, hang on, this is just an ultra processed food. It's full of soy protein isolate and emulsifiers and usually some refined sugar in there because that's what sticks it all together. And so these foods we've been sort of forced to think, and we can see, because we can see the nutrients where you can't see. Poor banana. I mean, actually, the banana, there's a reason athletes eat bananas all the time. If I could put a nutrient panel in the banana, you'd see, oh my God, I'm getting huge amounts of potassium and I'm getting other nutrients. I'm getting some prebiotic fibers. And actually, the carbohydrate is no higher than eating an apple. I just think the banana has been poorly maligned.
Yes.
It's a whole food. It's generally, unless you're having an incredibly ripe banana, it's actually, on the lower GI side. And it's incredibly nutritious. So a better snack would be to have a handful of nuts with your banana. Then you've got a great, perhaps some yogurt too, if you want to get the protein up. That's a much better snack than eating the highly processed bar. But we forget that because it's very easy for packaged foods to advertise themselves to us. So they've got their claims on the front. They've got the glossy, protein, low GI, vitamins and minerals, whatever. They can advertise their nutrition, whereas the poor whole food doesn't have that opportunity. So sometimes you've just got to take a step back and go, hang on. What's the level of processing? And that's a better way to guide rather than letting the food manufacturers tell us what's the best food for us to have.
Well, that's the thing, because that surely the skin on the banana is what says it's got potassium, it's got all of that. Like we shouldn't need to read that on there. Anything that we read really is probably more of an issue. But
Exactly.
I just thought it was a very funny analogy, and it just I think it's something that we really just need to take a long, hard look at what we're doing. We really have forgotten, with modern medicine coming in, and it's been brilliant. It's been able to, cure or, sort of help people live with diseases and lots of great things. But we sort of got lost along the way that nutrition really is the number one medicine, right? So it's the only thing that's going to get us through feeling great and looking great. And, and if we forget about the calories for a minute, obviously within reason, that really is the number one way to go. And on that note, I want to thank you so much, Joanna, for joining me today. It's been such a treat to talk to you.
My absolute pleasure.
I would love to chat to you again, but it's been a treat. And I want to thank you for your time today, because I think we've gone way over, but that's okay. I'm sure people will want to be listening to you anytime. So
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.